November 24, 1997. The press conference at the Tokyo Stock Exchange had the entire nation held in a collective trance. As the session drew to a close, the frantic energy of the reporters began to fade, their questions thinning out into a weary silence. Then it happened. Shohei Nozawa, the president of Yamaichi, suddenly rose from his seat. With tears streaming down his face, he forced a trembling voice through the quiet.
There is one thing I must say. This is our fault. It is not the fault of our employees. Please, I beg you, give them your support. Help them, please.
His voice echoed quietly through the room before spreading across Japan as a wave of shock. The footage was replayed again and again, becoming one of the most sensational images of its time. On that day, a securities firm that had long stood as a pillar of Japan's capital markets brought its history to an end. During the bubble era in Japan, 4 massive firms dominated the financial landscape. They were known as the Big Four: Nomura, Nikko, Daiwa, and Yamaichi Securities. Among them stood a firm that once rose to the very pinnacle of Japan's capital markets. Yamaichi was a true titan. Renowned for its strength in corporate finance, it played a central role in capital raising and market trading for the nation's largest industries. And then, one day, without warning, it collapsed. How could a giant of such scale simply disappear? To understand this tragedy, there is one thing you must know. Yamaichi did not begin with corruption. It began with a philosophy, one that placed trust above all else. In fact, for this company, trust was everything. The story begins with one man, a businessman who lived and died by those words. The man was Kunizo Koike. Born into a merchant family in Kafu, Yamanashi, he left home to begin an apprenticeship right after elementary school. He served under Ippei Wakao, the central figure of the Koshu Zabatsu, a man who built immense wealth in a single generation. Under Wakao, Kunizo learned the world of stock trading. But in those days, an apprenticeship was more than just work. Through sheer effort and determination, he rose to become Wakao's trusted head clerk and eventually earned the right to go independent. At that level, he was witnessing the decisions of a master up close. He studied these invisible judgments relentlessly. In other words, he learned how to think like a business leader. And he came to understand, business is not built on profit alone. It is built on trust. This was 1897. Armed with the knowledge and connections he had built during his apprenticeship, Kunizo arrived in Tokyo and set out on his own as a stockbroker. The stock market of that time was a completely different world. It was still in its infancy, with most trading centered on government bonds rather than stocks. Regulations were limited, and transparency was low. In this environment, the who mattered far more than the price. In other words, trust itself was the foundation of every transaction. Within this world, Kunizo established a clear and deliberate policy. He strictly prohibited speculative trading by his employees, restrained short-term profit-seeking, and placed the highest priority on building long-term trust with his clients. At the time, it seemed inefficient. But the results told a different story. People began to say, that firm can be trusted. Clients gathered steadily, and within just a few years, Kunizo rose to become one of the leading brokers among nearly 100 in Tokyo. 1907. The first major crisis struck Kunizo. A branch manager at a bank had been using company funds for unauthorized stock trading, resulting in massive losses. Those trades had been brokered by Kunizo's firm. The situation quickly escalated into a crisis of accountability, threatening the very survival of his company. Ultimately, Shigenobu Okuma, former Prime Minister of Japan, stepped in to mediate. And in the end, Kunizo made a staggering decision. He would personally absorb the entire loss, approximately 800,000 yen. That was $400,000, and at the time, which is equivalent to over $160 a million in today's value. At the time, it was an astronomical sum. But his reasoning was simple. Losing money is painful, but losing trust is fatal. That decision reverberated throughout the market. Doubt gave way to conviction. That firm will never betray its word. From that moment on, the name Kunizo became synonymous with absolute integrity. In the years that followed, Japan's economic landscape underwent a profound transformation, driven by war. Through the Russo-Japanese War and the First World War, capital markets expanded at an extraordinary pace, and the stock market surged to unprecedented levels. Amid this explosive growth, Kunizo's firm rose to the very top. By trading volume, his company ranked number one in the industry, becoming the undisputed titan of Kabuto-cho. But then, at the very height of his success, Kunizo made a shocking declaration. "I'm stepping down. I'm dissolving the company." The announcement came without warning. His employees were left speechless. However, this was no impulsive decision. Years earlier, he had already made a vow. For Kunizo, being a stockbroker was merely a stepping stone. His ultimate ambition lay in contributing to the public good through large-scale infrastructure and industrial projects. Upon his retirement, he credited his success, achieved through countless crises, entirely to the dedication of his employees. He distributed massive retirement bonuses and personally ensured that every single member of his staff was placed in a stable new position. Kunizo's company was fully liquidated and dissolved. However, the name Yamaichi lived on, carried forward by its employees. A new entity was established, Yamaichi Partnership. It inherited the trade name Yamaichi, which Kunizo himself had used. Appointed as president was Kisei Sugino. This would become the foundation of what later evolved into Yamaichi Securities. Sugino was selected by Kunizo, who recognized both his character and his capability. Upon taking office, he made it his guiding principle to carry forward the solid management that Kunizo had built. Grounded in trust, Yamaichi began its new chapter. Sugino quickly proved his capability. Just 1 year after the restart, the new Yamaichi had reclaimed the top position in the securities industry. From 1940 onward, building upon the foundation of trust established by Kunizo and strengthened by Sugino's leadership and the efforts of its employees, Yamaichi rose to number one in trading volume and maintained its position. Even after the stock market collapsed, the bond market remained strong. Sugino's strategy of placing emphasis on bonds proved to be exactly right. As a result, Yamaichi consistently dominated the industry in trading volume, and in the bond market, it commanded nearly 50% of the total, becoming, in effect, the force that controlled the market itself. Furthermore, Sugino moved to strengthen the firm's underwriting business. Breaking away from existing frameworks, he chose the path of an independent underwriter, starting with Yokohama, and then Osaka, Nagoya, and beyond. The firm expanded rapidly, extending its reach across the entire country. Then, in 1926, Yamaichi was reorganized into a joint stock company. Yamaichi Securities Co., Limited was born. Even then, Yamaichi continued to command an overwhelming presence in the bond underwriting market, becoming, in effect, a cornerstone of Japanese finance. In 1936, Yamaichi expanded into Korea and went on to establish branches in Manchuria and Taipei. By 1941, its workforce had grown to more than 700 employees. After the Second World War, even as the stock exchanges were shut down, Yamaichi endured, sustaining its operations through unconventional means, including lottery ticket sales, and then riding the wave of demand from the Korean War and Japan's period of rapid economic growth. After the Second World War, under the direction of GHQ, a large-scale release of shares was carried out. After the stock exchanges were reopened, Yamaichi leveraged the strength of its corporate-focused business, which it had built before the war. Under the leadership of its presidents, Koike Jr. and Okami, the firm established a strong presence centered on underwriting. The name, Yamaichi of corporate clients, remained unshaken even in the post-war era. Until 1951, Yamaichi maintained its position as the industry leader in stock trading volume. However, that position had already begun to weaken. By the late 1950s, Yamaichi was facing a growing problem: its slow response to individual investors. At its core, Yamaichi had long been a firm that prioritized corporate clients above all else, to the point where it was often said, "Without corporate business, there is no business." As a result, it failed to keep pace with the growing mass participation in the securities market, and gradually, the industry's top position shifted to Nomura Securities. Even so, Yamaichi continued to maintain overwhelming strength in the corporate segment. Yet, that very strength began to generate risk. In 1954, Ogami took over as president, succeeding Koike Jr., and set an ambitious goal to reclaim the top position among Japan's Big Four securities firms. He steered the company toward an aggressive expansion strategy. At the time, however, there was already a gap of nearly twofold in capital between Yamaichi and Nomura. Even so, in pursuit of becoming number one in stock trading volume, Yamaichi rapidly increased its workforce and expanded its branch network. By 1961, this bold strategy briefly paid off, as the firm began to close the gap with Nomura. But such aggressive expansion could not be sustained. Unsold stock holdings continued to pile up. The cause: an overexpansion of the business. A negative net worth exceeding 30 billion yen, roughly $80 million at the time. The situation was so severe, the company could no longer recover on its own. The Ministry of Finance demanded immediate reform. In response, Yamaichi's major shareholders, the Industrial Bank of Japan, Mitsubishi Bank, and Fuji Bank, stepped in. After discussions among their presidents, a decision was made to appoint an external leader and attempt a full-scale restructuring. In November 1964, Teru Hidaka took over as president. But the crisis did not subside. In May 1965, the Nishi Nippon Shinbun ran a front-page report on Yamaichi's financial distress. In that moment, everything changed. Customers, gripped by fear, began to move all at once. Crowds flooded the branches. In a single day, 28,000 people rushed in demanding withdrawals. It was a bank run. The company was pushed to the brink of collapse. That night, the Minister of Finance, Koike Tanaka, and the Governor of the Bank of Japan, Kusano, held an emergency press conference. What they announced was extraordinary. Emergency lending by the Bank of Japan. Unlimited. Unsecured. For Yamaichi, funds would be provided through its main banks. A sweeping overhaul of the securities financing system. It was an unprecedented rescue. Behind the decision was Tanaka, a man who would later become prime minister. This decision kept Yamaichi alive, but it was not saved. It was merely kept alive. Only then did the real reconstruction begin. Under Hidaka, and Yamaichi moved to rebuild from the ground up. Expansion was halted. The organization was tightened, and its profit structure was fundamentally reworked. To restore a sound footing, Hidaka focused on two things: organizational strength and a long-term vision. Not short-term profit, but building a company that could endure. 1966. A new Yamaichi Securities was born. At first, it was believed that repaying the emergency loans would take more than 18 years. But then, the tide began to turn. The stock market recovered, driven by government stimulus and the economic boom later known as the Izanagi boom. the market surged once again. With Hidetoshi stepping down, an insider took the helm. Wei Tani. After graduating from the University of Tokyo in 1935, he joined Yamaichi Securities. He knew the front lines. He had grown within the organization. In many ways, he embodied Yamaichi itself. The return of an insider president sparked excitement across the company. Years of externally led management had come to an end. At last, our company was back. That was how many within the firm felt. Pride returned. Confidence returned. Upon taking office, Wei Tani moved quickly. He set ambitious targets and rallied the employees. Not defense, but aggressive expansion. The results came quickly. In 1973, Yamaichi was relisted on the second section of the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Its headquarters was moved to Yaesu. The organization was restructured, laying the foundation for the next phase of growth. Its client base expanded. Assets under management grew. Yamaichi regained its momentum. It can be done. There was enough performance and enough momentum to make people believe. Before long, Yamaichi turned once again toward expansion. Caution faded. In its place, a belief took hold. That growth itself was everything. More branches, more employees, more transactions. If we push, we grow. That mindset began to dominate the front lines. Then came the 1980s. Japan entered an unprecedented economic boom. Stock prices kept rising. Land prices kept rising. Just holding assets makes you richer. That was the era. At the center of it all, the big four securities firms, and Yamaichi, riding the same wave, reached new heights of prosperity. In 1990, Yamaichi recorded a record recurring profit of 233.6 billion yen, roughly $1.6 billion at the time. It was the peak. Everyone believed the growth would continue, but beneath the surface, something had already begun to break.